51, excuse me. Psalms 51. Psalms 51. And when you have it, say, I have the word. Good. I'm going to wait on some more voices. I got two. Let me make sure I got everybody else. Psalms 51. And it reads on this wise, have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according unto the multitude of thy tender mercies. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from mine iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I acknowledge my transgression, and my sin is ever before me. Against thee only have I sinned and done this evil in thy sight, that thou mightest be justified when thou speakest, and be clear when thou judgest. Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, thou desirest truth in the inward parts, and in the hidden part thou shalt make me to know wisdom. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Make me to hear joy and gladness, that the bones which thou hast broken may rejoice. Hide thy face from my sins, and blot out all mine iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from thy presence, and take not thy Holy Spirit from me. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, and uphold me with thy free spirit. This is key. Then will I teach transgressor thy ways, and sinners shall be converted unto thee. If you would, give me a few minutes, and I want to talk to you from the thought, rediscovering God, recovering our joy. Can you look at a neighbor and say, I'm rediscovering God, and I'm recovering my joy. This brings us to our text, because it's in this psalm. The writer is the writer David. David is the same writer of Psalms 51, is the same writer of Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, acknowledging that the Lord was his shepherd. It's the same David that pens Psalm 122, acknowledging his happiness to be able to come in God's presence, because by right David shouldn't have been able to come into his presence. It's this same David. It's the same David who pens the words in Psalms 51. We all know that this psalm was written as a response and as a result of David's fail and his fall. So in order to understand this psalm, we got to first come to find out what caused David to get in this predicament, because we need to deal with our own predicament. And I'd be willing to bet you that our predicament and David's predicament lines up exactly. We need to deal with David and what got David in the predicament, because David tells us that the Lord is his shepherd in his shepherd boy days, but he's been elevated now to king. And when he should have been out to war, he's kicked back at the house chilling, which gets him in trouble. Somewhere in between his shepherd boy days and his coronation as king, David gets complacent. Somewhere in there, because he didn't have to be on the backside of the desert anymore, he gets the choicest things. He gets the grapes, and he gets the pomegranates, and he begins to feel the prosperity of being king. He gets that, and so somewhere off in there, he gets complacent. Somewhere off in there, David embraces his kingship and forgets about his priesthood. Many of us are just like that. Somewhere in between the low days of our lives, where we were on the backside of the desert, nobody knew our name, nobody was calling us, nobody wanted to be bothered with us, and we cried out to God. We wrote our own psalms, we wrote our own songs, things that nobody else knows. We sang them to God, and when God begins to bring us through the ranks, he brings us to our kingship, we forget about our priesthood. We find ourselves at that same place. We're in better predicaments because God has moved. We're in better predicaments because God has delivered us. We're in better predicaments because God has shown favor to us. Watch this, even when we didn't deserve it. Think about this. This wasn't the first time David slipped out the hen house. You got to think about this. This wasn't a behavior. This wasn't a one-time isolated behavior. This had to be something that he had commonly done before. How do you know? Because it was too smooth. Think about it. You know people, and something happens out of the ordinary, but they don't get shook. They don't nothing. They maneuver and they maneuver and they maneuver, and you like, man, they real cool. No, they've been there before. David had been there before. He had forgotten about his priesthood. He had forgotten that he had written Psalms 23 when he was on the backside of the desert. He had forgotten about Psalms 22 where he was glad when they said unto him, let us go into the house of the Lord. And so we find ourselves at the same point. We forget about the backside desert Psalms. We forget about the Psalms of ascent, but we find ourselves in a place of complacency. I got to say, it wasn't something, familiarity isn't something that is purposefully done. You just don't wake up and say, I'm just going to be familiar with God. Right. You don't wake up and say, I'm not going to regard God as God. It's not something that's purposely done, but it doesn't excuse our contempt of God. It is not an excuse to say, I didn't do it on purpose. That doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt God any less. It was not on purpose that we treated God like a redhead stepchild per se, but it doesn't negate the fact that we've treated God like a redhead stepchild. It's at this point that we find David, and David has gotten into this bit of a mess. We know the story. He looked upon Uriah's wife. He should have been out on the battlefield. He should have been leading warriors into war, but he was kicked back at the house watching Skin to the Max. Let me bring it modern. He was watching Bathsheba undress. He was getting his own peep show, and he is standing there when he should have been doing what he had been coronated to do. He was at the house kicking it. He looked upon Uriah's wife. He had to have her. He had her, and she became with child. In other words, he was complacent, and because he was complacent, it caused him to compromise. We don't recognize how silent of a killer complacency is. We don't recognize how one Tuesday will turn into another Tuesday, and another Tuesday will turn into another Tuesday, and before you know it, now you at Tasty Tuesday, and now you know what you at. Before you know it, it's a Tuesday, and you shooting tequila. You trying to figure out what is it? Where did I go? I was here, but now I'm here. Complacency. Complacency is the assassin of every saint. It is the assassin of every saint because it lurks in the shadows and it puts you in its sights and it says, now I've got you. Complacency says, there's one of these things nobody's going to know. I can get away with it. Complacency. It is that complacency that causes you to compromise, and it is that compromise that causes you to have to cover up. Watch this. Because David compromised, he had to cover it up. But the problem was his cover up didn't cover it up. Watch, because we know the story. Uriah comes home. They bring him home, say, hey, man, take a day off. Take a few days off. Kick it with the wife. Come on home. We paying for it. Come home. Come kick it with the wife. But Uriah had a king's mentality. My goodness. My goodness. Many of us have to get into a place where we got a Uriah mentality. Uriah says, I cannot come home from the battlefield as fine as my wife is. I got homeboys out on the battlefield who need me. Watch this. It's so many people out here, they have come home from the battlefield and they're being pleasured because they have they don't have a king's understanding. Uriah had the understanding of a king. It's as if Uriah had traded places with King David. It was like a trading places. It was like, how did Uriah get out on the battlefield? I've heard that Uriah was not a Israelite by birth. He was not an Israelite by birth. He was mixed with something. And so how is it that he had embodied, my goodness, the cause of the king, and the king had not embodied his own cause? So David believed it was going to be an easy fix to cover up his transgressions by bringing Uriah back from the battlefield to be intimate with his wife. But Uriah was too committed to the mission of what he was supposed to be doing. Let me stop right there and ask you a question. Are you committed to the mission of what you should be doing? Uriah said, I can't even rest. I mean, you know, she fine and all, but these guys out here, they're fighting for the honor of Israel. There's a cause in Israel, and I really don't have time for this. Baby, let me get back to the battlefield, bring these guys home, and we got time for that on the back end. How many of us would say, you know what? I really don't have time.